If you feel overwhelmed or confused about shipbuilding in Starfield, don't worry, because this simple guide will teach you all you need to know so you can build the best ships in no time. To start, you need to talk to a ship services technician to modify your ship or do it through a terminal in your outpost shipyard. Note that every shipyard has their own set of components, so you may have to fly to different shipyards to get what you want. For example, if you want more or special Deimos branded components, then the Deimos Staryard is for you. Before you start building, there's some important things you should know. You cannot rotate components in the shipbuilder. Certain components you can flip, but there is no 90-degree rotation, and the ship has to be facing the front or the forward direction at all times. Another thing you should know is the maximum size you can build your ship is 80 by 80 meters by 9 stories, and the module limit is 130, although all this can be changed with console commands. These are the components your ship must need before it can fly. So let's start with the essentials. I like to start with the landing bay first, that way it's easier to build on top of it. Since I'm at Aquila, I have 4 options. There's a hoped for landing bay, which is a pretty wide and simple landing bay. The NG6 is the default landing bay of the Frontier. The cool thing is it has 2 additional hardpoints at the bottom for weapons. The Stability Pro is a side-facing landing bay which can face port or starboard. Your shipbed 200 can be flipped front or back so you can enter from the rear, which not many landing bays can do. For this video, we'll use the shipbed 200. When hovering over the landing bay, dots will appear. Hover over one of the dots and press the attach button. You'll see all the modules that can attach to this part of the module. Interestingly, and this goes for most landing bays, the game still gives you the option to install another landing bay right beside it, despite the fact that it's not allowed, which I don't know why the devs let you do that. Maybe it's a hint for future functionality? Next is the hab. Despite the fact that it's not technically required, you need a hab as an interior connection between the cockpit, the docker, and the landing bay. There are 4 places I can put a hab on this landing bay, but just because I can attach one doesn't mean I have access to it. If you look closely, you'll see one of the dots has a small arrow. That's where landing bay access is. If you look at the default landing bay from the Frontier, landing bay access is at the top via ladder. There are 16 different types of habs, with some serving different functions. They range from plain empty interiors for you to throw your junk in, to ones with specialized storage containers like the armory, to ones with workstations and or labs like the science or workshop habs. Some habs have passenger slots, which, contrary to popular belief, aren't for crew members or companions, but rather for ferrying NPCs from place to place. If you want more crew members, get habs that have crew stations like the engineering bay. You can scroll through the variants of each hab size to see what's available. Now there's something you should know about these habs that's very important, but I can't dive into it in this video because it'll make the video too long. So subscribe and ring that bell so you don't miss that video, which should be coming soon. For now, to keep it simple, I'll use the 1x1. But if you want more habs or space, I recommend you don't use multiple 1x1s. That's just wasting money. Next is the cockpit. Here's the interesting part. You can't attach the cockpit to the end of this hab because then they'll be facing the wrong way. Earlier I mentioned that you can flip this landing bay, so I'll just click and drag it out of the way and press the flip button. And then I'll reattach the hab. And if I press attach again, you should see the cockpit category is now available. Each cockpit has its own cargo capacity and determines how many crew members your ship can support, but you can only have one cockpit. We have a variety of cockpits to choose from in Aquila. We've got the snub-nosed Armstrong cockpits, the default cockpit from the Frontier, the elongated Viking cockpits, and the middle-of-the-road Samurai and Daimyo cockpits. Each variant has different cargo capacities and mass. For this video, I'll choose the Viking 200. Like the landing bay, cockpit access is indicated by the small arrow. Okay, next is Reactor. Reactors provide power to all your ship's systems. The power generated is represented by the bar on the top left. Each reactor also has different repair rates, which determines how fast the reactor regains power levels after sustaining damage. The reactor also determines the class of your ship. If you attach a Class A reactor, your ship will be considered Class A, and so on for Class B and C. To get access to Class B and C reactors, you need to level up your piloting skill. If you want to know how to level it, and level it quickly, I've linked a video below which you can watch later. Contrary to popular belief, it doesn't technically affect how big of a ship you can build. It affects what components you can use. Class A reactors only allow Class A modules to be installed on your ship. Class B allows Class A and B components, and Class C allows everything. You'll notice that some of the choices are grayed out. That's because you need the Starship Design skill, which is a Tier 3 tech skill. So you need to level up quite a bit before you can access better module, like the Tokamak X150. There's no need to access the reactor, so we can put this anywhere. So I'll put the Stellar Raider 350 on top of this landing bay. Next is the Grav drive. Grav drives are what allow you to fast travel between systems. Grav jump thrust determines the maximum jump range of your ship, although mass also plays a factor on your maximum jump range. You cannot fly a ship with a jump range below 15 light years, and you can only have one Grav drive. We have a limited selection of Grav drives here, the Helios, the Default, the R1000 series, and you should avoid the SGD 1100 as it is one of the worst Grav drives in Starfield, so I'm going to use it. Now onto the engine. Engines provide thrust to your ship to move around and primarily affects your mobility stats. I'll attach one to this side of the landing bay. There are two kinds of thrusts. Engine thrust determines your maximum speed while traveling in a straight line, and maneuvering thrust determines your maximum speed while turning. All we have here are White Dwarfs and this Class B Nova engine. I'll stick with the default White Dwarf 2000. Here's something interesting to note. If you notice the jump range when I add the engine, it fell by 7 light years. If I add another engine, the reduction is only 3 light years, so the jump range reduction relative to mass is not uniform. On to fuel tanks. I'll put it on top of the cockpit. The fuel tank is where your grav jump fuel is stored. Larger fuel tanks allow you to grav jump further. There are no fuel tanks for the engines, and even though you're using fuel, the tanks instantly refuel as soon as you're done jumping. We only have 2 options here, so I'll get the M20. But you get more options if you install on the side like the 100G, the 200G, the 300G if you want to give your ship some testicles. So there's more variety and you can attach multiple fuel tanks to your ship if you want. Next is the landing gear. I'll place it on the other side of this landing bay. Landing gears are surprisingly important. Each one has a stat called landing thrust, and they all have varying amounts of it. It determines how much mass a landing gear can support when landing and taking off planets. The rule of thumb is 1 landing thrust per 200 mass. We have 4 options here. It is important that the bottom of the landing bay and landing gear are level, so the NG-10 won't work here, but it'll work if you attach it to the reactor. Also, pay attention to the size of the landing gear. The Hope 6 and Pinpoint 3G are big enough to obscure the starboard side of the HAB, which means you can't attach anything there, so I'll use the Acculander. And last but not least is the Docker. The Docker is how you board space stations and other ships. There are a couple rules you need to know when installing a Docker. First, there needs to be an interior connection to the Docker, so it needs to be connected to a HAB. So I can connect it like this, right? Wrong. Top and bottom Dockers cannot be accessed from the side. To install Dockers on the side, the Dockers either have to say port or starboard. The Docker has to be placed on the outer edge of the ship. But what does that mean? Well, it's not enough that the Docker is on the exterior of the ship. For example, if I place the Docker module here, I get this error. For the Docker to be considered on the outer edge, it has to be attached to where it would be equal or greater than the current dimensions of the ship. So if your ship is 3 stories high, like this one, then the Docker has to be placed and connected on the 3rd or 4th story of the ship. The same logic applies to lateral Dockers, but in my opinion, the best place to put a Docker is at the bottom, because it will always be at the outer edge of the ship and you don't have to worry about moving it around. Keep in mind, not all top Dockers can flip to the bottom. You also can only have 1 Docker, but because of how this ship is built, we'll use the Hope 11 Docker instead. Here's a pro tip. Even though I'm not doing it in this video, it's always better to put the Docker in last to save any headaches. Alright, so this ship is pretty ugly, but it's flyable now. This is what I call a minimum viable ship. But of course you're not watching this video to do the bare minimum, right? Looking at the flight check, we have 5 warnings. I see we're missing a shield. Shields protect your ship from incoming damage. Each one has varying health, regenerates, and max power. Only 1 shield module can be attached to your ship. I can install the shield module on top like this. I can also install it on the side and get more options, at least in Aquila. Because you can only have 1 shield, it's prudent to get the one with the most health. Higher class shield modules have more shield health, but lower regen rates, although there are some exceptions. The Bastille S81 has the highest max health of all class A shields in Aquila, so I'll put this on top of the landing gear. Underneath the cockpit of this ship are 2 dedicated hardpoints for weapons, and we see here we have a variety to choose from. each vary in range, power usage, fire rate, and damage. Weapons come in different types and each type targets different parts of the ship. Energy such as lasers affect shields, ballistics affect hull, and electromagnetic or EM affect systems. The exception would be missiles and particle weapons, which both deal equal amounts of hull or shield damage. The game doesn't do a good job of telling you which weapon is which. The only way to know if a weapon is a certain type is by looking at the damage stats. Aquila City doesn't have any EM weapons, so here's some from Deimos. Only EM weapons deal electromagnetic damage and are used to disable ships. The Flare P has better stats than the default laser and has farther range, so we'll choose this one. In fact, I'll put it on both sides. You'll notice there's an arrow at the bottom. If we look at flight check, we see that the weapons must be assigned to a group. So we go to weapons and assign the 2 Flare Ps to W0. But only 2 weapons, that doesn't seem enough. Well, there are hard points to the sides, but they don't allow weapons, unless you scroll to structural. Structural components are mostly cosmetic for modifying a ship's shape and appearance without affecting a ship's stats, except mass, but they can still be useful. For example, this horizon weapon mount will allow us to add 2 additional weapons to the side of our ship. So now looking at our options, the KE-20 looks good, so let's use that. It's important to note that your ship can only have a maximum of 3 different weapons, not total, different. For example, if I attach a Dangan PB at the bottom, and then I go to the other side and try to attach a missile launcher, for example, I'll get this error. But if I try to attach 6 Flare Ps to this ship, then this weapon group will use too much power, as you see on the top left, and I have to remove some of them. This can't be fixed by attaching a better reactor, so I can only have 4 Flare Ps max. In total, you can have up to 18 weapons on your ship. Of course, the weapons you want will depend on your playstyle. As you level up your starship design and piloting skill, you'll get access to turrets, which are ship weapons that automatically fire at enemies as soon as they're in range. It's important your turrets are facing the right way when attaching. If they're facing the wrong way, they won't fire. And for all the hoarders out there, cargo increases your ship's inventory space. If I attach it to the back of this landing gear, I only have one option, which is the default. But attaching to the side of this Grav drive gives more options. I'll go with the Caravel 102. But if you want to carry stuff that's a bit naughtier than toilet paper, then perhaps you should invest in some shielded cargo space that will help you hide your contraband from cops. You can find them at the Red Mile in Poroma 3 in the Poroma system, or the Key in the Crick system. And that covers all module types for shipbuilding. If we take a look at flight check, we have a low mobility warning. Mobility only matters if you want to do a lot of ship-to-ship combat, and you don't want to feel like you're flying a truck. The threshold for good mobility is at least 70, so let's try to get that for this video. We don't have many places left to put a new engine. I can't put it beside this landing gear because of the docker, and I can't put it beside this hab. I can put it on top of the Grav drive, but my options are quite limited. So what I'll do is move the cargo hold from the Grav drive to the left side of this hab. So I take out the cargo hold and flip it. I drag it to the hab, and then I go down 1 story by hitting F or whatever button is mapped on the level indicator. Now that that's done, I can attach an engine to the Grav drive. I think the White Dwarf 1000 will do. Uh-oh, looks like our ship is too heavy to jump now. This is why Grav drives like the SGD 1100 are absolute dog shit, so we'll have to upgrade to the 1200. Alright, so I took the liberty of moving the fuel tank and adding another hab on top, and added a tile cowling to round out the hab and the cockpit. But as you can see, this ship is good to go. I'll admit, it's not a good looking ship, but it's a better ship than the Frontier. I'm not exactly the most artistic shipbuilder, and if you're in the same boat, there is one more thing we can do to make our ship look better. I'm talking about paints. If you hover over one of the parts, there's a color button at the bottom. Hitting the color button brings up this screen. Color 1 is the primary color, color 2 is secondary, and color 3 is tertiary. Let's use yellow for color 1. What else? You know what? Let's use the same colors I use in my thumbnails for 2 and 3. So green is 2 and red is 3. I wish I could be more precise with choosing my colors, but that'll do. Once you're satisfied, hit accept. Once you've selected another module to color, you'll notice that our colors we used are saved here. So we can just boom, 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 and done. But painting each part of your ship individually can be quite tedious. So if you want to color the entire ship with just those 3 colors, double click on any part of your ship or hit LB on the controller and it'll select the whole ship. Then just boom, 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 and done. Now my ship looks like a massive toy spaceship. But what if I only want to color some of the ship the same color? Like the cowling, the habs, and the cockpit. Well, just control click or hit RB on the controller on the parts you want to color. And then again, same thing. Alright, and we're done. Once you're satisfied, just hit exit, accept, and pay the credits. If you have any loose items in your ship's interior, they will all be transferred to your ship's inventory even if it's already full. So a kinda nifty way to cheese your ship's inventory. Now we have a brand new ship built from the ground up. Literally. If you also want to rename your ship, just go into flight check and the option to rename should show up. Let's take a tour of our new ride. The one downside of the landing bay facing towards the rear is you're gonna have to do a bit more running now. Here's our new landing bay, let's get in. Alright, so this is the 1x1 hab. To our right is where the docker is. To the left is where the cargo hold is. If we go inside the cockpit, it's much better, more spacious than the one in the Frontier. On the left is the captain's locker. And to the right is the cargo hold. Going up the ladder is the all-in-one berth. There's a bathroom, and the 2 bunk beds, and a storage box next to the bathroom. And then there's a kitchen and living area here. Seems like Lynn has already decorated this place. And, ooh, a fridge. Nothing special in here. And I believe that concludes the ship tour. Made it this far into the video, thank you so much for watching, I really appreciate it. If you found this guide helpful in any way, then hit that like button, subscribe and ring that bell. Now that you have the foundation to build ships in Starfield, you'll be building the best ships in no time. In fact, you can build a near invincible ship for a surprisingly small amount of money, and if you want to know how to do that, I have a video which you can watch right here.